Initiative at John Cabot University. And I want to thank Director Professor Silvio Polino of the Morini School of Business for making this conference possible. Thank you very much. And, I also want to give my greetings to Jonathan Appelman, who is by now conducted quite a few of these events, and we're happy to see you again. And welcome back to Rome. And we are going to be discussing this important aspect of the development of artificial intelligence. You know, a few years ago, I was thinking that a few years ago we were reading, and probably with some skepticism, Kurzweiler talking about the age of singularity and the exponential explosion of human intelligence and discovery. But today we discovered that if he was wrong by defect and not by excess. He really underestimated the explosion and the speed of this explosion. So artificial intelligence in the span of 2-3 years has taken over the way we live and our prospects about the future. Some think we are entering a dangerous age of enslavement for the human race, but others speak of never-ending growing abundance, with machines providing us with all our material needs. Whatever we might think, this explosive transformation is forcing us to confront the way we regulate this new world and the way in which governments will deal with the ethical issues of power, control, democracy, and distributive fairness. But that is an assumption, as it is not at all clear that governments will use their new acquired power for ethical reasons, even though those who wish to do so might be forced in other directions for existential imperatives. So these are complex and difficult issues which we might need to understand sooner rather than later. And we are lucky to have with us today our guests, some of them old friends, some new friends, Jonathan Appelman, Jamie Harvey, Roberto Verotti, Leonardo Quattrucci, 4 brilliant minds who I'm sure will provide a stimulating analysis of the problems at hand. And without further ado, I give the floor to our moderator, Jonathan Appelman, for the introduction of the speakers. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having us, and thank you for So you have in front of you 4 people who clearly are gluttons for punishment. We're all involved in different ways around these issues, and they are challenging to say the least. But by the same token, they're hugely important. And so I think that I want to begin by, I want to read you something that was written a few years ago by a fellow named Mark Andreessen. And if you don't know, Mark Andreessen is a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, and probably the most influential venture capitalist right now in the United States. If not the most influential, he's right up there in the top 2 or 3. And back in 2023, he wrote a piece called the Technologist Optimistic Manifesto. What was it? Techno-optimist. And at the time, it rocked people's world because the presumption had always been that Silicon Valley was very left-wing in its viewpoints towards technology, and people were very surprised to see a very different view, a libertarian view, as it were. So I want to start out by just giving you the first 2 parts of his manifesto, his Optimist Manifesto. So this is just exactly what it wrote. Lies. We're being lied to. We are told that technology takes our jobs, reduces our wages, increases inequality, threatens our health, ruins the environment, degrades our society, corrupts our children, impairs our humanity, threatens our future, and is ever on the verge of ruining everything. I think if we stopped there, it would have been an Encyclopedia Britannica of everything that's happened in the world that's bad, but it didn't stop there, because you don't just stop there if you're having a manifesto. So he continued and said, we're being told to be angry, bitter, and resentful about technology. We're being told to be pessimistic. We're being told that we should denounce our birthright, our intelligence and control over nature, our ability to build a better world. We're being told to be miserable about the future. Okay, thanks for that. Truth. Truth. Our civilization was built on technology. Our civilization is built on technology. Technology is the glory of human ambition and achievement, the spearhead of progress and the realization of our potential. For hundreds of years, we've properly glorified this until recently. I'm here to bring you good news. We can advance to a far superior way of living and being. We can have tools, the systems, the ideas. We have the will. It's time to once again raise the technology flag. It's time to be techno-optimists. So I thought I'd begin the panel by saying, we all remember when this happened, right? Think about your reaction when you first heard it, and think about your reaction to it today. Is it different, or is it the same?
Well, the great news is I got my own mic, so you can play your own. You know we can do this. Yeah. Now we're gotta turn it on. Here you go, officer. You don't have to use the mic. Okay.
Okay, so,
Turn it on. Look for the light. You see a light? See a button?
can you hear me?
Oh my God, that's wonderful. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I remember when this came out, and I remember being mad about it. I remember thinking to myself, the way he's framed this is he's seizing this very important idea of techno-optimism and turning it into a functionary libertarian tool of domination. Like it really subverts, because what people really need, I mean, like techno-optimism is important. It actually is possible for technology to create a world with abundance, but it's not happening. And certainly in America, we're going the other direction. So, and then to take that big lie and do what right-wing authoritarians are doing all over the world and accuse the other person of making the lie is disgusting. So that was my reaction to it then, and when you read it today, that was my reaction to it now.
So you just don't have an opinion at all, basically?
Yes.
Don't have an opinion. Leonardo, what about your viewpoint?
So when I read it with, in 1995, Umberto Eco wrote an essay called On Eternal Fascism, when he described fascism as a syncretic ideology that brought together very many different groups under an umbrella that wasn't very clearly defined. And interestingly, down in that manifesto, Anderson quotes Filippo Tommaso Marinetti and the Futurist Manifesto.
Mm-hmm.
And the futurists had this idea of exuberance that had no purpose, right? It was exuberance, so he talks about the excitement of the flying car as something that is meaningful in itself. And I think that's where we are. But I think we should take this absurdity very seriously for two reasons. Number one, we are in an age of absurdity because the liberal order does not exist anymore. You see more ambiguous alliances. All alliances are fading. By more ambiguous alliances, I mean that you can make deals with the Gulf states and then be at odds with them on, military issues. All the alliances between the US and the EU are fading. So values are no longer a comparative advantage or a certainty, but interests are. And what he's talking about here is the ends, in this case, taking over the system, the techno-industrial system, justifies the means. And so that, I think, is one point. The second one is that, by the way, I think Anderson Horowitz is the most successful media company in the technology space, right? They're a media company first and then a venture capital firm. And the second thing is that the success of Anderson's narrative, which is not isolated, right? Peter Thiel is another one, is the failure of the progressive counterparts, because they become too technocratic to see that issues of growth today are issues of culture. And that's what I think they've understood. And so they're able to excite masses with a vision of a nostalgic past that doesn't exist, but they're not counteracted by a constructed vision of the future.
So, Roberto, you and I did 2 panels last year on the change in American government, and we promised ourselves we're going to do it again. And we're 10 minutes in, and we're back in the same place. So, what happened?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yes. Well, thanks. No, I'm not going to say the word Trump, though. No, I guess to answer the original question, my reaction originally, I remember, was that the real problem with that kind of statement, and that there's a number of similar statements that we can think of in recent years, is that it makes it look as if they know what the future holds. And there is where I see the problem. The problem is when the future stops being open-ended. That's what, deep down, what worries me. It's not that they have a vision of the future, because each one of us is entitled to one, or more than one. But the problem is, as a society, it needs to be open-ended. It needs to be contested, whatever, competitive, whatever you want to call it, uncertain. If it's not, and there's only one future, then we all have a problem, because it's as if we are giving someone else the keys to our whatever, to our homes, to our cars, and do whatever you want, because you have seen the future, and I have not, and that's what makes me feel uneasy with that kind of statement. The other thing is, you mentioned the liberal order. I've been in a very long conversation with friends and colleagues in sort of the political science world, especially IR, World International Relations, because I keep thinking it never existed. But you're certainly right in a different way, through a slightly different angle, which is we always believed in that as an ideal, as a point of reference, as a potential endgame. Let's say the progressive idea. But again, the good trick was that it was open-ended. It was not self-evident. It was always a matter of conversation, in fact, of disagreement. Like, I have my own progressive view, you have your own. It's not the same, and that's great. That's fine. So this I think we should oppose. The idea that these people actually know what the future holds.
Well, without question, the word that I often use when I think about how Silicon Valley right now is viewing the use of AI, the application of AI, it's very deterministic.
Yeah.
And the way I frame it is with AI versus human, it's an either-or conversation. You either have AI or you have humans. It's not an and conversation. And I certainly have opinions why that is, but I'd be interested in first hearing yours, because I agree with you that we're in a deterministic world now. I guess the question is, did the technology industry find its way to determinism because of the way the business models adopted, or did societal trends change conditions for success, rewarding determinism? It's a which came first, chicken or the egg question.
So, what I've come to believe is that there's an ongoing evolution of standards in our culture that shape the way that people act in various cultures that get locked in by various technologies. So, the Italians invented double entry bookkeeping that made the company possible. The Dutch invented the stock company, which made it possible for people with money to have more votes for what happens in the world. In the 90s, while this revolution was going on in Silicon Valley, they made it a law that every company has to always pursue shareholder value above all else. Like, I was an entrepreneur, I had a company, and we were in trouble, and a billionaire came in to invest. And when the new CEO I hired suggested that we basically turn this technology into an evil machine to make people do what you want them to do in companies, that seemed like something really good for business. So we had to do that, or we would, be liable to be sued. every company in Silicon Valley operates under these conditions. Every entrepreneur essentially basically has to give up their autonomy as a human to make choices about what's going on, and you have to follow the money. And the money has become so concentrated in Silicon Valley that, you know, the libertarians were always there. My first company was in Silicon Valley. Like, they were everywhere there. And they took the position that democracy was kind of bad because nobody was ever going to do what they wanted to do. And now they basically are trying to lock in their millions of dollars. And for them, AI is the most powerful tool to influence standards. Because if you control Grok or ChatGPT or any of these platforms, you can basically get people to go along with what you think. And they're not even hiding what they're manipulating.
So your argument then is that you think that where we are is an outcome of unconstrained capitalism?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And you know, cannibalistic capitalism. Essentially, cannibalism in America is eating itself. We need a compassionate capitalism. I'm really hoping that Europe will lead the way on that, because it's not going to be China, it's not going to be Russia. Like, help us, EU1 Kenobi, your only hope.
To me, those are the conditions that change, because you have the world that is breaking up into multiple spheres of influence again, and you're not just competing for geography as you did during the Cold War, you're competing for network centrality, and so setting the standard. And so that's one piece. The second one is that you have a growing number of asymmetric technologies, and it's not just AI. Quantum computers are believed to be able to break encryption as we know it. So there's a race, and more players and less aligned players. They're aligned to interests rather than values. And so in this competition, it is obvious that it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I don't think it's just unconstrained capitalism. It's also the fact that if you have convergence of national interests, technological development, and the ownership of this means of production that are both political and business right now, then you're almost, you feel like you have no choice but to race to. That's why you have the phenomenon of accelerationism and the idea that doing things faster is always better, and then you lose a little bit of the sense of where you're going. And in fact, I think that the greatest risk we run is not an AI that turns us to paper clips or automation, but before that we'll have human-led escalation.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm actually more optimistic in New York, and the reason why is I think in some ways we have taken the last 8 months or 9 months, and we've become almost deterministic ourselves. The system, the world is so upside down right now, but it's really important to recognize that the complexity of society transcends the particular pathology of a single human or a group of humans. And the arc of history is long, and so that's number one. Number two, at least I'm finding with my own company that I'm doing, there are ways to provide market-driven approaches that are alternatives to this determinism. But I think that you identified something really important, which is just we are existing in a world of almost paradigm capture. Where the four of us are sitting here, with the audience, I know individually talked about, we're all optimistic people. We're all people that believe in solutions, but yet we start this conversation, we're 20 minutes in, it's the world's ended, the rules are done. Well, but let's unpack it.
To be really clear, like, I don't think the world has ended. I don't think it's done.
Right.
But in the 90s,
well, okay.
the Chinese essentially invented authoritarian capitalism. Like, China became a capitalist country in the late 90s. Russia copied that and became an oligarchy without any democracy, but essentially became capitalistic. And essentially, there are people in America, there are actors in America trying to make that happen in America, except instead of with oil billionaires, with tech billionaires. And it's important that we resist that. So, like, it's not that it's done, but like, your vision for AI, like the company that you're starting, is incredibly inspiring. You know, like, it's the reason I invested in it, is because tools are tools. They can be used for good, they can be used for bad. But there's an awful lot of money being passed around in a circle right now in Silicon Valley that is perfectly willing to have it cannibalize the poor. And we used to have a better vision for that in America, and it's important that we bring that back and we speak it aloud.
So, is it a failure of regulation? Is it a failure of antitrust? Give me some perspective from a political science standpoint.
No, I was interested by the way you framed the question, the original question, the chicken and egg thing.
Yeah.
Whether it's society that allowed this to happen or made this more likely, or whether let's say the technocrats understood something that we didn't, and they changed society so much that it's unrecognizable. Okay? I put it this way, but there's many ways. I have no idea which started first, but I'm sure that what happened at some point was that some of these people that you just described, essentially, this circle, which is pretty small, by the way, it's pretty tightly knit, they got to a point where the level, the scale, the amount of privilege they have in terms of impact is such that they can actually change society. That it gets difficult to turn back the clock, but not even back, we need to move forward, not backwards, but still to change the direction of what they're doing. It's difficult because they have, there's also this connection, political power, economic power. For example, I was honestly somewhat surprised when Elon Musk, first thing he did, first decided to support a candidate, then he decided to actually get a political role. I was surprised. I didn't expect that he would do that, because I thought that would be counterproductive, which it was, to him. I don't know about myself or most of the American citizens, I have no idea, but for himself. So he probably understood quickly enough. He's a quick learner, and he went back to a slightly different role. But I was surprised, but there I also see a glimmer of hope, because that means that, for example, institutions continue to matter, to the point that someone with that amount of economic power, for some mysterious reason, wanted an openly political role, which again remains a bit of a mystery to me, but he did.
So on that point, I think, first, I don't think this is very new, right? In history in general, when you have a general purpose technology entering the market and society, you don't really know what's going to happen. When the steam engine penetrated first, didn't know what was going to happen. Electricity the same. And so that's why even those that are creating these technologies disagree whether they're going to be normal technologies or whether they're going to be super intelligence. The same people that are building it. And so I think we're in a phase where there is technological uncertainty and very low consensus. And in this space of uncertainty, the only way to understand what's going to happen is to live it through. Now, how severe the cycles will be, how severe the bubbles bursting will be, it's open to question. The second point on institutions mattering, now, thankfully, Nobel Prizes for economics are recognizing that, but Peter Thiel has never been very secretive about the idea that because systems fight back, in order to, you have to capture the system. And if you look at the history of fascism, it was the same. And so I think, I never understood why there is mystery around the theories of Peter Thiel when he speaks about them very clearly in interviews. Maybe because he uses biblical quotes, but it's very clear.
Look, I think that in the United States, we've grown up in a political environment where there are certain topics that have become tropes, and the words have been misused so much they can't be used to properly describe behavior. So, for example, when I tell people that I'm probably the only Marxist-trained economist who's in the venture capital industry because I went to the LSE, people look at me like, "Oh my God!" But the reality is that if you really want to understand what's going on in Silicon Valley, Marxist economics provides better explanation of libertarianism in a lot of ways, right? But you know, oh my God, you're a communist, you know, or you're a fascist. So the problem is a lot of the tools that we would use to analyze behavior objectively can't be used, because if you use them, then it falls into a trope and it either gets disabled. You know, to say to somebody, that guy reminds me of Mussolini, that it could be an absolutely accurate statement. But yet, oh, you're calling him a fascist. Well, I am, because he is. But that doesn't. But let's understand that that's word is just a word to describe a political system. It's not, you know, normative. But I want to point out something though, just from my life experience. So I started out in the financial services industry. I didn't start in technology. Started in the financial services industry, and I was actually talking with one of our students about the old days. So my first investment banking job was Goldman Sachs. And when I joined Goldman Sachs, I was just a peon. I was lower than the whale's bottom, you know, but I was there behind the firewall working at Goldman Sachs. And Goldman Sachs was a partnership. Goldman Sachs was not a public company, it was a partnership. And that meant that every partner at Goldman Sachs had infinite liability if the bank made bad decisions. But at the time, not only did infinite liability, the bank made bad decisions, they were also fiduciaries. They had an obligation to put the client's interest ahead of their own. And I remember sitting with them when we were talking about merger and acquisitions and clients. Goldman Sachs had a rule that they wouldn't represent a buyer if the seller didn't want to sell. Imagine that. They would not represent somebody who was a creditor. And they were completely convinced that they saw banking as an obligation. And another bank called Drexel Burnham came out of nowhere and basically said, no, it's all about financial stuff. We don't care. We'll represent creditors. We'll represent anybody. Put money on the barrel, and we'll play. And they and a couple of investment banks changed the industry and made it much more bottom line and financially motivated, all about the numbers. So I'd like to say that in some ways, that I feel like what's going on in technology is unique, but I guess from my perspective, I think there's a bigger thing going on, you know, with respect to the financialization of society. You know, and Silicon Valley figured out how to play into that rather than, you know what I'm saying? That's my chicken. My chicken is the financial services industry rather than the technology.
I mean, what comes for me, one of the most worrying phenomena, speaking of that, is I don't know if you've seen The Economist's issue of last week was on the relationship recession, essentially loneliness economics. And that to me, so in 2023, the general surgeon of the US declared that every year he writes a report, and he said that the biggest health risk in the US was a loneliness epidemic. And that, I think we're seeing the change that you were talking about, where attention and loneliness are being commoditized. And as machines move to a relational form, then the incentive of capitalism becomes to build a bubble around you and feed off your solipsism. And so two anecdotes. One, I was at a conference of investors last month in London, and the first presenter was this professor at Shanghai. And she exposed these images of herself that were half pornographic, half immaculate conception. And she was saying that now that we have, it was interesting, to say the least. It caught attention. And what she was saying is that we're moving to a paradigm of self-sufficiency because of the machines. And so earlier this year, I don't know if you watched the movie Her, now it's become famous, that was 2014, and I remember feeling sleepless in London and anxious about it. I asked myself, would you ever fall in love with a machine? And I thought it was absurd. Then earlier this year, I was at a drink, bored, and I asked around people, would you ever fall in love with a machine? And nobody said no. So that, I think, speaks to that. And the only way to counterbalance it is to have public institutions and not just regulation.
I think that's right. You know, I recently researched this for a talk I gave at the university, and, you know, out of every 10 people that are on social media, 40%, 4 of them are addicted, seriously addicted, which I thought was interesting. 1 in 3 high school students says now that they have either had a romantic relationship with a chatbot or they have a friend who has.
Yeah.
It is absolutely, you're right, we have become, if we're not careful, we have become the product, right? It's basically what's happening.
And it's important to know that the oligarchy, the way that they've established these companies, is they relentlessly try and reduce impedance. They try and speed things up. They try and have things happen faster. That allows them to hotwire their way into your brain faster, so that you're not using your best human thinking, because you're just reacting to whatever chemicals are flowing through your body. And by keeping people lonely, they can turn you into a consumer of things.
Well,
Now,
so are they doing this because they're nefarious politically, or are they doing this because they're just trying to make money?
and they're doing it because everybody's doing it, and they feel the competitive pressure. Like when I started this company in the 90s, we had this incredible vision for like having a communitarian platform, and when things got rough, we threw it out the door and tried to have the company survive. And they're also playing these con games. You know, the system is designed to attract people with weaknesses. They might have addictive personalities, like I did. They might be narcissists, like some of them are. They might be, and then it plays on their weaknesses to get them to go out and help the dominating class dominate people. There's an interesting thing happening with institutions right now, which is that the institutions that are comfortable with change, chaos, breaking things and moving fast are trying to have things go as fast as possible, and they're having to throw their lot in with authoritarians. And the institutions that have been around for a long time are going, whoa, wait a minute, I'm Disney. I'm not sure I want to play along with this. I'm the Catholic Church. I'm not sure I want to play along with this. I'm the NFL. I'm not sure I want to play along with
The
this.
Catholic Church is definitely not playing along with
They're
this.
definitely not. I mean,
They named themselves after the Pope during the Industrial Revolution for a reason. Yeah, we did. The Pope
Yes,
chose
yes.
him because he sees what's going on in the eyes.
It's very interesting to see which institutions are coming out to challenge the rising tide of authoritarianism.
Okay. So they're institutions. So number one, I agree with you that Silicon Valley, a lot of people in Silicon Valley, they're caught up in this circle of them. But there are a lot of people that aren't in Silicon Valley. There are a lot of people in Europe. There are a lot of people that are entrepreneurial and trying to solve problems who are part of that circle. The good news is that the investment bubble that's fueling this nonsense will likely pop, the same way the internet bubble popped. But like we know with the internet bubble, the internet will abide. AI will abide. So maybe one way to approach this and ask ourselves, when the current investment mania ends, when it becomes obvious that OpenAI can't lose $72 billion a year and be sustainable as a business, which is what they're saying, they're going to lose money until 2030, the bubble will burst. How do we, as citizens, how do we as leaders influence the conversation so that humans can coexist with this great tool, because it can be a good tool if it's used properly?
No, I have no idea, except in a general sense that, which has been mentioned already, which is we have to see these algorithms, and to some extent I think the next stage would be humanoid robots with the algorithms inside, as tools in a way that we frame the questions, we keep asking questions, we don't expect the answers to be either true nor false, just sort of likely, probable, interesting, useful, but not necessarily the truth, which is very hard because it takes a lot of sort of pre-Socratic thinking, you know, to go through this. And let me add one factor. I think it takes, we need to make the best use we can of the really scarce resource, which is time. Because it's been mentioned already, and I think, you know, these things are designed to suck time
Yeah.
and attention, and it works wonderfully. It's, you know, it's unbelievably effective, and we're all somewhat addicted to different degrees, and we think we dominate these things, but we don't, because they're so incredibly attractive and appealing, and they know exactly what we want in a very simplistic way, because it's only our past. They study yesterday, right, all the time, and they recreate yesterday's behavior for us, because they have no idea about the future.
Which, by the way, is, I think, our saving grace.
No, exactly. Exactly, that's
I
why.
mean, only humans actually can imagine.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm going back to what I said previously. That the only way to save this open future is to keep thinking that it's what we make it to be. It's not written anywhere. It's not somewhere to be found, to be discovered. But it's like a trick. You have no idea until you get there. And these things, certainly, the whatever AI will come forward, at least for now. They don't even have a concept of the past and the future. In fact, I did a couple of little experiments with, not ChatGPT, one of the others, with a couple of friends, and in most cases they seem to not really understand time.
No.
Tomorrow, yesterday, 3 days ago, 3 years ago, they don't really have a clear conception of the difference. The relevance of, for example, 2 centuries ago is very different than yesterday. Well, it's not clear to the way they reason through these questions that we keep asking. So anyway.
Yeah, you're right, because at the end of the day, it's just really sophisticated spell check. You
For
know,
now,
but
for
really,
now.
it's
Yeah.
just a kind of power, it's not actually
Yeah,
thinking.
it may evolve, but for now, that's what it is. Yeah.
And there was a giant breakthrough with the NVIDIA chipset that made a lot of new stuff possible. And since that time, there's a giant money shell game going on.
It's the internet.
All globally, right? And there's a bubble. So we're further from generative AI than they're telling us. Sometimes they're telling us, hey, we're techno-optimists, everything's gonna be great because of this. Okay, we're further than this. But there's also these test-roll people, the people who are like, oh, the singularity is coming, it's gonna eat the world. They use that to create fear, to create attention, to keep the money going. And so how do we, the best model for how governments can react for that is what happened with surveillance capitalism in the early aughts and 20-teens, where America basically, the lobbyists bought Google being able to do whatever they want in our browsers in America, and Europe had some sensible regulation.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is, like, your sensible regulation makes things better all over the world, makes things better in America, because the companies actually have to go develop it for Europe as well. So if a region, if an empire can create an ecosystem where common sense, thoughtful regulation prevails, and people have AI that is actually thought through and is built with some concern for the impact on humanity, and if that AI is better to sell to companies like Disney and the NFL, and companies that are interested in that, which actually most big companies are, then it can win. Technologies have to win. So this move fast break thing, crazy thing that they're doing out there, it's not gonna work, right? So slower movers, people who are more thoughtful, need to get ahead of this, have common sense regulation, export it all over the world, and that's how you keep this from becoming, I'm not somebody who thinks the singularity is gonna eat the world. I think the singularity, the fear of the singularity is gonna be manipulated by people to cause governments to be able to manipulate people and bring in authoritarian systems.
I'm gonna disagree with both of you.
What?
Yeah. So first,
He warned me.
just to spice it up.
Yeah, no, go for it.
First,
I know what you were gonna do.
I don't think the tool might be sophisticated spell check,
Yeah.
but because it's a mirror to human dysfunction, the behavioral consequences are high.
Enormous. I 100%
Right.
agree.
And so I think thinking metaphors shape our relationship with objects. And so I think if we think about it, if we reduce it to a sophisticated spell check, we are making a technocratic mistake and blinding ourselves to the behavioral changes that are happening.
That is, I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, I started this company because and I went to a professor's office one day and he said, I want to show you what happens to a group of people when they use AI. And he showed me a graph of 1,000 different organizations, and it was very dispersed. It was like a big idea club. And I said, what's this? He says, this is people answering the same question. See how they differ? I said, yeah. And he said, that's normal human behavior. He said, look what happened in the same organization we started using AIs. And they were just this tight circle.
And I said, what's that? He said, that's people using AI. That's people using AI. You know, it's like a loud drunk in your group that won't shut up, and eventually it's like, all right, Larry, we'll go do what you want, just shut up. You know? So you're exactly right. It's highly addictive. It's designed to be addictive.
Yeah, and also I think most people use it as a sophisticated spell check because they're probably very poor or shitty managers, to be honest.
Yeah.
They can't really communicate. So that's one piece. The second one is, I left the European Commission in 2018 because they were writing the General Data Protection Regulation, and there wasn't a single technologist in the room. And that's an incomplete understanding of the world. And it's showing now because the very law that they prided themselves of is the first one they're trying to repeal now because they're losing competitive ground. And so I think regulation is necessary but insufficient, especially in a market where if Apple doesn't want to comply with the regulation, it can go to India, much bigger market and faster to penetrate. And so I think the failure, and governments, frankly, at least the ones I know best, need mavericks.
Yes.
Governments need mavericks, and there's a very practical problem of people like bright students not going into government because on the one hand they'd be willing to take a pay cut for a higher purpose, but they're not willing to lose flexibility and to be told what to do. And so you have to change the way you recruit. You have to change the way you incentivize people, the way that DARPA works because it gets smart people in the right job and gives them a deadline and says, go build what you know how to build.
Used to work.
Yeah, used to work. Works better than the commission, I think.
Okay, that's true.
So I think there's two elements. I think just one last is, I think there is a generational question as well, where, you talk, just moving to a little bit of Will, how do you create an alternative? Disengagement from politics, justified or not, is one of the reasons I think why narratives and nostalgia are prevailing. Because if young people get more isolated, ultimately cultural growth is born from creating communities that are irreverent towards establishment, they're convinced in their ability to make progress. And if you lose that, then you're not going to have generational change, or you're not going to have a vision of the future, but one of the nostalgic past.
It's incredible. I thought we were having a conversation about technology, and we're actually, yet again, here we are, Roberto,
Yep.
we're having a conversation about politics yet again. But
No, by the way, one point that I think is coming up quite sort of emerging gradually is that there's something very specific about, I was going to say liberal democracy, but I think open society is a better term maybe, because there's many different ways in which democracy can be organized, many constitutional systems, whatever checks and balances you can think of. But let's say open societies, which is they require critical thinking and individual responsibility, which unfortunately is not for free, right? It takes an effort to get engaged. So what you're talking about is crucial, but it has a cost for individuals, for communities, for families, whatever, even tight-knit communities, but this sort of engagement is not easy. So I think one of the problems with the way these technologies are being used is exactly that it has created the conditions for that to be even more difficult for most people. So that's another sort of vicious circle that we're in, and we don't know how to break the cycle.
So here's a thought experiment. I met earlier today with a couple of our students who came to me with a really interesting idea around taking AI agents and putting it in a home where you have an older person and using an AI agent as a way to have them interact and then use that as a way to see how they're doing, how they're feeling, how to get them out of the house, out of the community. And I thought about it, I said, you could train a model to actually not make them depressed. You could train a model to, you could actually train a model to help them feel better, which would be completely counter to the model. So what would have to change about the structure or the way society works for commercial use of the models to actually make people outward bound instead of inward thinking? Is there a way to change that other than regulation? could you solve this problem through market? Could you make the money flow for actually
A market solution for a market problem.
Yeah. Could you do that? Is there a way to do that?
I think for point solutions like that, of course, there's no impedance to it now. There's no reason you couldn't go out and create a foundational model on top of ChatGPT and train it to do what you're talking about, and you could figure out a good user interface for people in an assisted living home to make them less lonely. I mean, there are a lot of great applications being developed. The interesting thing about that, though, is it's still built on top of this foundational model that's owned by Sam Altman, and he decides to turn it into a pornography machine. Like, that may sneak its way into your product while you're not looking, and you have to watch that the whole time because you're renting a slot on somebody else's infrastructure, which is being trained on the chat rooms at Reddit that 14-year-olds are using to tell each other to kill themselves. And so, like on some level, I believe when the bubble bursts, they are going to go back, and people are going to build better foundational technologies that are not LLMs. And if that were to happen in a well-regulated environment, because it's always, the grass is always greener on the other side. Like, I'm looking at Europe and going, oh my gosh, they've got privacy regulation. And I talk to people here in Italy, and they're like, oh my gosh, you guys can't do things without being stopped by regulation. And so, they're, I mean, it felt like in the 90s, early 90s, we had a pretty good balance of that in America, and I feel the lack of it now.
So could a liberal democracy or a liberal government basically build its own LLM and open source it?
I mean, America has effectively, for the moment, it's not over, I'm not saying it's over, I'm a techno-optimist, I'm a real techno-optimist. America has given up its position as the funder of government moonshots. Like DARPA isn't DARPA anymore. They've essentially outsourced that to Elon Musk. And
no, that's not true. I love you, but it's not as dire as that.
I would, please tell me. I would let me pose this question, because if you know something,
I think that, to be fair, because I have visibility into it, I think that, again, sometimes, and I can
non-military moonshots.
no, look,
the cancer research.
Look,
last spring.
This reminds me of March. And November, where we were talking about, it was almost, do you ever remember Ghostbusters, the movie Ghostbusters, where the marshmallow thing is going to kill everybody?
Yeah.
I really feel like we need to all take a breath.
This is 1980s.
Elon Musk and Donald Trump and Peter Thiel, in some ways, are like, I feel like they're the marshmallow man. There are a lot of people that, we need to remember that 7 or 8 million people demonstrated for no cause. We need to remember that there was just by-election in the United States, and every place there was a vote, the country moved towards Democrats. We need to remember that there is a lot of reason to believe the Supreme Court is going to do things like, for example, draw line of tariffs. So I'm not suggesting that we don't have problems with oligarchy and some things were described. But I think that what I'm trying to get at is that when we think about technology, we're going to ask you about, can you build an LLM that's not exploitive? The answer is you could.
You could, you absolutely could.
So, right?
So maybe we need by the way, for the benefit of those who don't know, DARPA is this US agency that invests in breakthroughs, internet, semiconductors, the risks, the markets, all of that, scientific and GPS, space exploration. Lots of Elon Musk companies wouldn't exist without. But maybe we do need an agency like that that's focused on social issues.
Yeah.
And that's how you create the market incentives to do that. And I think part of the problem, at least in Europe, is that the money for that, first, people always talk about money as the problem, and I think it's not a matter of size, it's a matter of how well spent it is. So that's number one. Procurement is 2 trillion a year. 1% saving on that would be 23 billion a year that could be reinvested in innovation, but it's not. And the second one, I think we have European growth is faltering because we have a cultural problem. We don't have the cultural growth anymore. And when I talk to philanthropists, they all see these problems, decoupling of education and employment, decoupling of technology with social issues. But then it's very hard to get them to, and then you spend 4 hours at lunch with them and they offer you 200,000 euros. What do you do with that?
At least they buy you lunch.
Yeah.
At
I
least
thought you were just talking- I thought you were people where I buy them lunch.
it's more expensive to digest than actually to do the thing.
It's really interesting to me because, again, we're talking about determinism, and it would seem to me that Europe has an opportunity to reinvent and create an alternative narrative to technology. You know, and that to me is the big opportunity right now. That it could, these tools are getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. They're easier and easier to learn. I think, frankly, a lot of the reason why the bubble's going to collapse in some weight is that it's going to turn out you don't need to have massive solar farms to run these models. You know, they'll get more and more efficient. But
Sorry, there's
Yeah.
one point that I wanted to raise earlier that I think is useful here in this sort of transatlantic perspective, comparative terms. Leonardo knows the Brussels crowd much better than I do, but you know, there's sort of a joke across Europe that I've heard in this country as well, which is the following: that okay, we're regulating this thing because we don't have it. Okay, we're regulating something that we cannot create. So of course it's the easy part because we don't have it, right? So we're so dependent on others that we are left sort of free to regulate it. So that's the dark side
Can I ask a
of the
question?
moon,
I
right?
have a dumb question. So why don't you have it? I mean, like that's.
Well, it's the ecosystem problem that it's very complex. I'm sure Leonardo can tell you more about this, but what I hear from, again, in this case from the technologists, because that's what I rely on to get a sense of why it doesn't happen. It's a complex ecosystem problem where you don't have enough venture capital, you don't have enough, you know, the classical role of, you know, big name university institutions cooperating very directly with companies, blah, blah, blah. So it's a social, economic model issue.
Does it make it more complicated to be in a federated union? I mean, with different cultures?
That doesn't help.
Doesn't help.
In general, it doesn't help. And so in this case, it doesn't either. But yeah.
I think that's the market problem, where you know you can't incorporate a startup using a single entity across EU27.
Yeah.
You cannot.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's number one. Second, but I think the deeper issue, which is harder to solve, is the cultural issue. So I work with some startups, and if you go and talk to venture capitalists here, you don't get network effects.
Yes.
You don't get a cultural long-term growth.
Yes.
You get your cap table screwed for the highest return in the shortest amount of time.
Right.
And what they incentivize you to do is sell.
Yes.
And when you go on the other side, what they tell you is think big, think long, don't sell, endure, you know, coach you. So that's the fundamental difference. And I think that's the deeper problem, because you can fix markets or you can change rules, but if you don't change the way you use them, then nothing's going to change.
you know, it's interesting because I look at the financialization of venture capital. You know, venture capital, you know, back when dinosaurs ruled the earth, and I started in venture capital 25 years ago, a large venture fund was $100 million. Right. Most funds were $20 million or so. And then we had the internet bubble, and funds got larger, and fund managers realized you could get 2% of a large number a year just by showing up. And now venture funds are multi-billion dollars. And the problem with that is you can't move the needle in a $2 billion fund unless you invest $100, $200, $300 million in a company. So the money forces entrepreneurs to pursue an outcome to justify the size of the money in the industry. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm facing right now, you know, how will I fund my business? And the last thing I want to do is take $50 million from a bunch of VCs, because then I'm a slave to making a $1 billion company, or else they're not happy.
Yes.
And that may not make me happy. So the industry is clearly messed up by money, is like what I'm saying.
Yes, definitely. So interestingly enough, I've started 7 companies. My second company I actually started in Florence. And I went around and I tried to raise money in Italy. I spoke to probably 15 investors, and they were impossible. I mean, it was not productive. And I took the company and I moved it back to America, where we raised money.
Surprise, surprise. No, sorry.
But that's why the ecosystem was challenging.
But that's why you also see big funds like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase investing in asset management now.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they
Yeah.
I don't see the connection.
Well, because it's all the
because the VC market is a party market. I mean, I was at this Italian Tech Week in September, and everybody had two things: either an AI company
yeah,
or a venture capital fund.
yeah. That's investing.
Except for me, obviously, but yeah.
Right.
So it's a market for lemons, and
Yes.
so I think what big funds are looking for is existing value, reindustrialization by managing assets better and getting productivity increases rather than funding new things that are inflated.
That's right.
So if we all know that it's broken, and then we're sitting here, we know it's broken, we're sitting in a room, we're surrounded by really, really smart people. The United States is clearly at the moment going through a period of retrenchment. Why can't we get the leaders of the Italian business community, the Italian government, and the French government, why can't we get them to understand that there's this massive opportunity to reframe this conversation? I mean, I understand this cultural, why not? I don't know. Maybe I'm too American. I'm trying to get them to the Vatican and talk with them about it. But why not?
Bigger player. Anyway.
I mean, as a VC, somebody invests, this to me, being a financial investor, this screams trade. This may be the biggest opportunity that's available to the European community could ever have. Reframe AI in a way that makes it work for society. Why not?
I mean, the only short answer I have is that so far, which doesn't mean we would repeat the same mistake, but so far, the EU as a complex institution hasn't been very effective narrative-wise. Okay, they don't communicate very well. They're not really understood by most citizens, and most EU citizens believe that they will better understand a message that comes from the national government. So there's a major fundamental problem of trust in the EU as an institution. But having said that, because this is the institutional answer, on a more practical level, most things that happen within the EU, it seems to me, happen because 2-3, not necessarily major governments, but at least a couple of the bigger countries decide to take the initiative, and then things start moving. So we don't have to get stuck in the pure institutional debate. There are ways around.
Bottom up.
Exactly, or let's say a little team building around a specific idea, set of projects, and so on. The EU has often worked like that. It's not perfect, and it's a bit it's not very cost effective, but it can be a solution at times. But I don't know whether that's enough. But I see the opportunity you're talking about, no doubt. No doubt.
I don't know the Pope. I wish I did. But,
That's
I use, everybody uses socks stand, I'm a Phillies fan. But I look at his pronouncements around technology, and I look at what he's trying to do. I look at the history of Rome and Italy, and I just wonder why there shouldn't be more of an effort to try to make Italy or Rome the center of this new approach. I mean, why not? Why not?
I think you have some interesting examples in the semiconductor sector. For instance, Italy has attracted, in fact, the most money from the EU Chips Act came to Italy. It's a very well kept secret. And the only startup that got EU Chips Act funds is a startup from Milan, Ethos. They make photonic chips with quantum computing and AI applications. But when you go beyond that, I think, sorry to be a broken record, but you have talent poverty. Wages haven't been growing for 30 years. It's very hard to, if you hire somebody, good luck. I mean, you're married with them, essentially.
Yeah.
It's probably easier to get divorced than to fire somebody. And you have very low talent and capital concentration. I mean, the advantage of Silicon Valley is that you go get a coffee and then you find investors and people you can hire. And I think Paris, I spent a lot of time in Paris these days, and I think architectural infrastructure matters. They converted old train stations into co-working spaces, but you need density of capital, of talent, and time to see things grow.
So, as we wind up, I'll ask each of you, how do you think it's going to play out in the next 5 years, and then 20 years from now? You know, what does the world look like? And maybe, well, I'll just start there. What does it look like in 5 years? What does it look like in 20 years? Or maybe we should do it this way. What do you think is going to happen and what you hope is going to happen? Sure. Just agree.
I think in 5 years, by then the AI shell game bubble will burst, and we'll get a little bit of relief, and there'll be some time for cooler heads to maybe do some better stuff. And I hope that in that time, America pulls itself back from great authoritarianism, and people begin to be able to have a real conversation about what the right amount of regulation is to create an ecosystem where AI can actually create some abundance. That's what I hope will happen.
And for me, presidents always have. And that was Marcus Aurelius saying that, not me. But so look, I think you have a scenario of escalation, and we're seeing it now. You have a scenario in which the EU can only compete if others implode. And I think all of us are competing against our own obsolescence. I think the most significant change that can happen is a cultural one. I mean, between the 1500 and 1700, the Industrial Revolution was a cultural revolution where the Republic of Letters, a group of intellectuals, transnational, egalitarian, based on thoughts, came together and thought that progress was a good thing. And I think we need a resurgence of letters. And in that I think is a generational struggle. The new class struggle is going to be a generational struggle. And I think to overcome the moment we're at now and to find creativity, because if you think about technology as the bridge between what is imaginable and what is buildable, I think that change is only realizable if that generational passage and a resurgence of letter happens.
Yeah, I'll take the 5 years versus 20 years perspective, which I think is useful. The 5 years framework, I think, to me the big question will be whether the cooler heads will also be within the business community itself, not just in government institutions and so on, because I think this fight where, you know, to frame everything in terms of regulations versus the market, I think is not enough. You need both. You need the market people, the business people to change, and there could be a generational change as well in that sense, because these people are usually pretty young, and so maybe there's a new batch that we don't know of right now. There may be small startups and we don't even know their names. Maybe they're thinking in the terms that we were hoping they will. Maybe they are. Exactly. Sure. So that's one thing. I would say 5 years is a reasonable time frame. The 20 years time frame, I was reading something the other day that really struck me, which is this humanoid robots planned by, well, a number of companies in China and in the US. So, to me, full disclosure, I've always been an avid reader of Isaac Asimov since I was very young, and he got it right in the 1940s, which is unbelievable. And if you read some of his stuff from the 1940s and 50s, it may have been written yesterday. And to me, there's this big, major weakness in the way we look at AI today, which is the current models we're thinking of, which is that they don't have a body. They don't understand death and fear and time constraints because they don't have a body. They're not embodied in any significant way. So they're not like us at all. They're completely different. Now, if they start having something like a physical existence, they can touch things, move things around directly, that would change their brain, I think, which is exactly what Asimov was saying from the very beginning. I have no idea how, but I think that could be a big change, a qualitative change. I don't know whether that will happen in 20 years. Maybe too early, maybe even, maybe it will happen earlier than that, but I think that would be a major.
That shift will happen.
Yeah, major
Yeah.
leap.
Listen, that is likely to happen if for no other reason that as the population growth is flattening out, there are more and more old people, there are not as many young people to take care of old people. I think that's why it's not surprising that Japan, for example, is leading robotics very, very much. Exactly, so the last,
Italy would have to.
yeah,
Because we're old.
yeah. But if you read Isaac Asimov, he had the 3 rules, the 3 laws of robotics, and then the first one, the most important was you can never find a human, and that was the most important immutable law. And I think, it's funny you think about the number of
Funny that they're not doing that.
Well, they're not doing that.
Yeah, not at all.
And so it's very, but we come to the end, and I think that, so the students that are in this room, I wonder whether or not you actually, to paraphrase the United States term, whether you get the joke of this hammer. But the point of this is believe it or not, where we come to is you. Because what we're basically saying is that right now the world is basically being presented with the idea of false choice about how we use technology, how we live our lives. It's very deterministic. And what we're basically saying is that the generation that you're in has to make a choice about whether or not to buy that narrative. So believe it or not, you suffered through this hour and 50 minutes for a reason, which is I want you to go away and I want you to really think about the next time you use AI, the next time you do an assignment, or the next time you think about your career, understand that the future is not written right now. You're being told it's been written. And the more that you buy into it, the more you're harming yourself, because literally your willingness to push against the status quo is all of our best hope. I think that's basically, that's the bottom line for today. So, thanks a lot, it was great fun. Yet again, here we are, our 3rd time, and we're back in politics. Maybe when we see each other in March, we'll talk about, we'll talk about unicorns or something. Anyway, I want to thank the panel, and I want to thank you all for staying.